Hi there. Welcome back to How's Your Book, the channel where we talk about books. In this video, it's going to be a little bit more general or a special episode, and Cole will explain.
This is Marcus, by the way, in case you don't remember, because you've only met him once before, unless you're his dad and mom, and maybe his brother. Today's video, we wanted to introduce a possible victober tag video. We're hoping that other people will also want to participate and find the idea interesting or fun. Instead of sort of doing a tag that is primarily focused around talking about our previous experience with books, specifically Victorian literature, and making recommendations and stuff like that, I kind of wanted to open it up a little bit, in part inspired from Ross's challenge of empire spotting, so sort of taking a particular theme. This is also true for Kate's theme and Hannah's theme, respectively, friendship and education, where sort of applying specific themes to what we've read, and sort of interpreting it that way. Additionally, I kind of like acrostics. You take a word and such as victober, and you apply words for each letter. So a word for V, I, C, T, O, B, E, R. Victober! And then additionally, we're making a fun game out of it, and we've got a dice to roll. Yep, that's a dice. You're gonna need a 6-sided die if you want to play this victober tag, or I will share a link to a dice rolling thing, a website. There must be one. So for each letter of victober, we, with help from our friend Kay, selected 6 possible words that could come up. But each word, so there's 6 words per letter. So V has 6 words. The first word is 1. The second word is 2. You sign a number to the words, and then you roll the die. And if it's 1, it's the first word. If it's 2, they got this. Yeah. I think what I'll do is as we go through our answers, we'll share what the 6 possible words are, and you'll see them listed below. If you want to participate, we will be really excited to see what you've got to say. It's totally possible to do this tag having only read one book of Victorian literature. It could have been abridged. It could have been one of those great illustrated classics that Marcus might put in here that we both read as children.
And really liked.
Any additional comments about the introduction?
Well, I don't have a ton of background I haven't read tons and tons of Victorian novels yet. So my references are also a bit limited. I'm, going to come back to
both of us.
The handful that I've, read yet and my initial impressions.
We're also going to be referencing, I think a fair amount, some of the books that we're currently reading for Victober. So for myself, that is George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss.
And for me, it's John Marchmont's Legacy by Mary Elizabeth Braddon.
Okay, so the first letter of Victober, it's V. And so the words that we came up with were voice, virtue/vice, vitality, visual, violence, and vocation. And when I rolled the dice, I got vocation. And Marcus, what did you get?
I got virtue/vice, which that one's 2 words counting as 1. I realize if you're a word count purist, this might rankle. It rankled me a little bit, but such is life.
I feel like you're the one who chose to do
No.
Okay, so since I've been talking a lot, we're just going to hand it over to Marcus. Marcus, what do you got to say about virtue and vice this Victober Eve?
So something I found that I'm really enjoying in my limited, thus far, readings. I like that a lot of the authors, seem to establish these characters that are kind of case studies in some kind of moral principle. In Middlemarch, right, one of our references that we've read, Dorothea, she's kind of this interesting archetype to explore an extreme of naivete, right? Lydgate and Rosamund, you can say, are going to explore sort of extremes of pride, each in their own way. They're going to be an illustration of some principle. And Eliot does this without being, I think, didactic. But it's something that I've found that I'm enjoying. These high concept characters that are going to illuminate some principle, some matter of morality or the heart and soul. John Marchmont's legacy, I find, is of this vein. We have a lot of interesting, characters with some extreme characteristics that are going to, be sort of a treatise on some kind of moral issue like that. I also like, again, my reference is Middlemarch, and I think it also happens in John Marchmont's legacy, in my opinion. I kind of like when the authors can make their good characters seem a little annoying. You, the reader, can understand how they're a little annoying, and you can kind of understand the villains, understand the less good characters' perspective. There's a very interesting essay by Nina Auerbach in this book, Middlemarch in the 21st Century. It's called Dorothea's Lost Dog. It's funny. It's from the perspective of someone who didn't like Dorothea very much reading the book. Nina did not take to Dorothea very much. She makes a lot of very interesting points about Dorothea. I thought, a very interesting salient observation she made is that, Dorothea maybe isn't all that smart. She points out how throughout the book, Eliot describes Dorothea will be reading some book, but not really like managing to pay attention to it and sort of closing it immediately. And this happens several times in the book. She can't really seem to, whenever there's a description of Dorothea reading, she's not really reading, and she'll wind up closing the book. Nina Auerbach puts this against how Dorothea maybe, isn't the person to really appreciate the difficulty of Casaubon's work. The difficulty of researching, the difficulty of writing, the difficulty of sustained intellectual pursuit, whether it's successful or not. It's a very interesting essay.
I like it. So that leads us nicely into what I rolled for, which I mentioned earlier, which was vocation, which I would say is like one of my like favorite sort of like themes and like subjects within like the Victorian literature that I've read so far. Vocation has sort of like to me kind of like romantic elements to it, sort of this strong feeling for a particular career or occupation. It has, I think, a little bit idealistic tendencies, but then there's also a realistic thing where it's like you need money, you need food, you need stuff, you need furniture. That's a theme. There were a couple of things that came to mind for me. So in Middlemarch, which we're going to keep coming back to, I think we have like a few different interesting sort of explorations of vocation. So we have Dorothea, who's, whether or not, she can read, is like fairly desperately yearning to have like a useful vocation. And in the beginning, we have the references to how she's working on like housing plans.
Yes,
like housing development, the cottages. And then later on how she really wants to like apply herself to like helping Casaubon with his writing project, that like reaching for something like useful and purposeful to do, which later sort of like shows up in different ways in her life. I think the other two characters that come to mind for me in interesting ways are Fred Vincy and Lydgate. So with Fred, we have this really nice tension where, Mary Garth is kind of like rejecting him a little bit or like pushing him back because of the idea that he would, like if he would go into the like church, he would kind of like make a mockery of it and like be a fool. In part because it's not a true vocation, it's just sort of like a thing to do. And then for Lydgate, we have pretty profound sense of self and like identity around like how he envisions himself as like a medical man and like what he wants to do with that. But then it like, falls kind of flat or like doesn't carry through. Vocation is a really interesting topic. We also see that with like other things such as like Jane Eyre and like being like a teacher for some people. We're also seeing it with the victober read along, the group read, Hester, and the way in which Catherine is has become like useful to the bank and like is important for that. So I think vocation brings up like really interesting thoughts of like how do you fit within a society and like the institutions that run it. How are you of service, and what does it mean when you kind of like lack that strong feeling and can't really make it happen and do anything with your life. Yeah, so that's my V for Victober was vocation. So the next letter, you guessed it, is I. And the words we came up with were inspiration, intimacy, industry, import, and you can kind of take that in whatever direction you want, inheritance, and intellect.
We came up with them together because there's no I in Victober.
And we both rolled the same word. We both rolled intimacy, which really brings us closer together.
Yes.
Marcus, what are your thoughts on intimacy within the Victorian literature?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is sort of the intimacy that develops between you and an author that you've discovered you like. You know, that feeling of like, oh, this is my friend now. You know, I appreciate their perspective on things, or I appreciate their humor,
Their voice.
It's a very special feeling to return to Middlemarch yet again. You know, especially something like Middlemarch, right, where George Eliot has constructed such unbelievably deep psychological profiles, and you're like, wow, this is all the work of one person. And I think it's all the more powerful of a feeling because, you know, there's that wonder that you have that it's across time, right? It's across this ocean of time that you're getting this feeling with, you know, in relation to the work and to the person. I mean, it can be why we can struggle with things in someone's personal life if we find out about, right? Because there is this feeling, right? And I think that's why we are a little challenged sometimes if some of the authors that we like, we find out that they were complicated people.
Or they wrote The White Man's Burden.
Sure.
I would also say, like, similar to what you're describing is, like, not only, like, the intimacy you have between sort of, like, the author and, like, engaging with them over their, like, text and building up that sort of, like, essentially parasocial but still meaningful relationship. Yeah. I feel like you also get that in, like, community, either with, like, the people that you're reading the books with. Sometimes, like, physically, you may be reading a book aloud with somebody else, or how you're talking about it, or, like, additional literature that you read related to the book. And so the way in which, like, you become more, like, intimate with your own sort of, like, understanding of the world, but also with, like, other people.
Yeah. And nice. Speaking of which, you know, shout out to the wonderful Victober community. Thank you so much to everyone who commented on the previous video. You know, it's very meaningful just to know that you guys took the time to watch the video and to, you know, leave such kind comments. It's very heartwarming. And the community on the Discord, you know, it's so many lovely comments and thoughts, and everyone's so nice. So nice to see everyone sharing their thoughts and experiences with the books. It's very wonderful.
Did you have any other thoughts for intimacy?
Oh, something I find is I don't know if I just have slightly prudish tendencies, but I kind of like the restraint with which the Victorian authors approach sex and attraction. You know, there's so many euphemistic ways to describe attraction, and there's so much that's not said about sex, right, but is understood on some level. And I'm like, this is great. You know, I'm like, I don't need crass descriptors of
You want
everything.
Spice level mild.
I want it to be implied.
So for intimacy, I didn't have a lot to add, but the main thing that I was thinking about was, especially for works that like explore the sort of interior lives of like multiple characters who are interacting with each other, the ways in which intimacy, we can see it be a thing that like brings people closer together, but we can also see the ways in which intimacy and partnership is like really lacking in relationships. For instance, in The Mill on the Floss, you can see that in some ways in which the familial bonds that are happening, community in terms of like they're near each other and like they're going through similar things, but there's a real lack of mutual understanding and cohesion that like I think affects people pretty profoundly. Similarly, you see that in the Middlemarch chapters that are focused on Lydgate and Rosamund, where they just have like this really profound divergence, you know, and like cannot resolve to like understand each other and meet each other and like build that intimate relationship, even though they are within the like the structure of intimacy. They can't actually like do it. What's nice about some of the works that we've read is how it brings up the ways in which you can know another, and where that's fragile and difficult.
I haven't mentioned it up to now for the prompts, but one of the books in my limited set of references is New Grub Street by George Gissing. I did listen to the audiobook recently. It was wonderful. We had Vocation for our first letter. It's also a great novel about what are a person's vocational qualities and how are they constrained by the meanness of circumstances, and also a wonderful book about the breakdown of intimacy and how two people can come to see each other at such cross purposes where there was a unity of vision at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our next letter is, of course, C, and the words we came up with were challenge, care, censorship, class, children, and church. Marcus, what did you roll?
I rolled church. So,
which would have been number 6. We don't have a dice that says church on it, or a die that says church on it.
No. It would be interesting if one did have one. You roll it on Sundays, I guess, to see if you're going to go to church or not. Church and religion is such a pervasive theme in Victorian fiction. And it's interesting to see where it's so present and where it's less so. I mean, I think in George Eliot, it's so present, right? Mm-hmm. I think it seems very present in Mary Elizabeth Braddon as sort of a underlying social fabric, moral fabric that holds characters together, is a common reference point. But it's interesting to see where it's absent. I mean, I don't think Gissing seems very spiritually or religious. Like, you know, it doesn't seem like it was important in his life and that it's not something really in his repertoire. I mean, you know, he wrote tons and tons of novels. I'm sure the subject of, like, you know, clergy and it may very well be in one of the books, but, you know, reading one or two of his books, you don't get a sense that it's something that really informs his perspective most of the time. You don't feel its presence in the way that you do in another author, which it's interesting the degree where it can vary. Nice.
So for my dice roll or die roll, I got censorship. I didn't have any my background in Victorian literature isn't strong enough exactly to have a lot to say about censorship. The main things that come to mind, of course, were trials around Oscar Wilde towards like the end of the century, I believe. But I did do like a little bit of research, very casual research, and I found a great chapter of the Oxford Handbook of the Victorian Novel, and I found there's a chapter by Barbara Leckie called "The Novel and Censorship in Late Victorian England." I will link it down below. The other thing that I was thinking about, in large part because of Barbara Leckie's chapter, is readership. And so like a reading audience was like newly developing and becoming more and more common. Who's reading these books? And so there did seem to be a bit of a sort of tension that you see at times where the audience of like young women reading things, and sort of like how that influenced tropes, I guess, linked to that, what like the role of the novel is. And so sort of like is the role of the novel to like teach? Is it to be a lesson in like moral behavior. I strongly recommend checking out Barbara Leckie's chapter again. It's called The Novel and Censorship in Late Victorian England, and I'll link it below. For our next letter, we've got T, and the options we've got are T, as in like drinking tea, which you can interpret, I guess, as drinking tea, but also T as in gossip. So T, technology, tradition, time, travel, could be time travel, and thrills. What did you get, Marcus?
So I have technology. I have an interesting curio about technology. I wouldn't say it's a very important part of New Grub Street, or like, a very like meaningful passage as such, but it's a fun little coincidence and curio. There's a character in George Gising's New Grub Street, Marion Yule, and she has to do a lot of work, like I think copy editing, and also like reading books to review books. It's books in, books out all day. And, her life's monotonous, and this work is repetitive and hard, and she's become disillusioned with the world of books and letters, partly because she sees that it makes people bitter. There are a lot of petty, authorial squabbles. She sees that her own father is very embittered against a literary enemy. And she's probably also come to see, all this churn of books that she's reading and reviewing as a content mill, a never-ending tide of content. There's a part of the book where, she's thinking about, it's disenchanted her. She'd love to, to wash dishes or whatever, do something with her hands. There's a part where she sees an ad in a newspaper for the literary machine, and she's like, have they come up with a machine that writes books? And it turns out it's just a thing for like holding books, or holding the book and you flip the pages. But she thinks, had it then been invented at last, some automaton to supply the place of such poor creatures as herself to turn out books and articles? Alas, the machine was only one for holding volumes conveniently, that the work of literary manufacture might be physically lightened. But surely before long some Edison would make the true automaton. The problem must be comparatively such a simple one. Only to throw in a given number of old books and have them reduced, blended, modernized into a single one for today's consumption.
Wow.
It's just a funny little anecdote, but New Grub Street predicted large language models and AI, the rise of AI.
Thanks, George. So for T, my word was tradition, which we definitely wanted to throw in there, in part because we love Fiddler on the Roof, which I don't think has much to do with Victorian literature. For tradition, my focus was on generation to generation traditions, and families like relate to each other going forward. And so the main thing that came to mind was from George Eliot, The Mill on the Floss, which I'm in part struggling with, to be honest, crowd. I'm having a time. So I was thinking about tradition because one of the things that happens on The Mill and the Floss is at the beginning, Mr. Tulliver, who owns the mill, sort of, is wanting to have his son Tom get an education, with this idea that Tom is going to go get an education and he's going to learn things so he can have a vocation that is not the mill. He's like, I am not going to have my son come in here and try to inherit my mill and be part of the family business and get me out of my work too soon. No, he's going to go over there and do something else. I was thinking about that in the way it sort of like, in part kind of like flips the common idea of like somebody being like forced into the family tradition and the family business. And instead of that is being sort of like cast out of it or sort of pushed aside, regardless of whether or not that's the like right call in terms of his disposition. So I was thinking about it in terms of like, what does the tradition like serve, and what does it mean to like vary off from it? So, yeah, so those were my tradition thoughts. Tradition. So for O, the words we chose were obligation, own, and you could pull that in different ways. Order, occult, oppression, and offensive. And Marcus, what word did you get?
I got offensive.
Woo!
Of course, there can be offensive material in some of these books. I read The Odd Women by Mr. George Gissing. Wonderful book. It is a little shocking if you're not used to it to encounter, as you will in The Odd Women, 2 instances of a racial slur.
Also, in The Mill and the Floss, you get that with like, we're really concerned about Maggie being kind of brown.
And one of the challenges for Victober were observing and thinking about the topic of empire, which many of the ideas around empire that we're going to encounter in these books are offensive in the sense that, they involve a great deal of violence against other peoples and other parts of the world. With regard to that intimacy that we develop with the authors and with the material, it can be challenging to think about how much humanistic spirit there is in the works, right? But we always wonder, like, if that sensitivity, who did that sensitivity extend to, right? To who was it not extended? What were the attitudes regarding other peoples, right? I think it's very possible that you can write a great deal with humanistic attitudes and not exercise them. I think that's very, very, very easy to imagine. It's very possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, this isn't Victorian literature, but one of my favorite books is Speaker for the Dead, which is one of the sequels for Ender's Game. And Orson Scott Card he's, I believe, Mormon and has specifically anti-LGBT views and like puts his money towards it. And yet, like, for a lot of people in Ender's Game, there are like some things that suggest or point to like a different sort of like understanding of like intimacy between different characters, including characters of the same gender. And so it's like you come up against this like sort of wall in a way sometimes. It's interesting to think about like who's like included and who's excluded, and that shows up in like different ways.
I think I encountered recently a passage. It's by Elif Batuman, the writer. It was a passage they were talking about the film Dumbo and how it was possible for, even children who are mean bullies to watch Dumbo and root for Dumbo to overcome his bullies. The point is, everybody watches the movie and thinks they're Dumbo. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter, sort of the attitudes. And I guess in the same way, it's probably just as easy to write Dumbo and think that you're Dumbo, regardless of whatever you're doing.
Yeah. All right. So for my word was obligation, which, like I mentioned earlier, felt very in connection with my previous word, tradition. But for obligation, I was sort of like thinking about the moral and like legal, the ways in which you are morally or legally bound, and like may feel like obliged to do something. In particular, I was thinking about it in terms of like community and the social sort of like cohesion type stuff and how people show up in each other's lives, and help each other. A sort of lack of that shows up in The Mill on the Floss, and I think an interesting but of course like frustrating way in some ways. There's a family, the Tullivers, who have a degree of like financial precarity. The wife's family, the Dodsons, are they're like gathered around, and there's a strong sort of like rejection of the idea that they should help and somehow provide assistance. So they're saying like, no, we are not going to help. We are not going to provide assistance. And they're saying it in varying ways and degrees, but overall the gist of it is like, nope, we are not helping. And part of the reason is that they reference is this idea that the Tullivers should feel the consequences, and they should learn the lesson. They should feel the impact of their financial ruin, their precarity, and they should take some sort of like grand meaning from it. They feel that they are not obliged to help, and that the Tullivers are actually obliged in different ways, including morally and also legally, to feel fairly dire consequences for things going on. Yeah, obligation in terms of like the ways in which you help, but also like can feel like, oh, actually there's like a greater thing that's more important here. That means I don't have to help. So the next letter is B, And our words were beginnings, betterment, beauty, background, books, and boredom. Marcus, what's your B?
This background. I'll talk a little about my background as a reader prior to this new interest in the exciting world of Victorian literature. In the past, a lot of my reading has been genre, entertainment stuff, science fiction, maybe like action thrillers I've dabbled in a little. Characters will be able to solve their problem. Like conflicts are going to be resolved through action and violence. I do find that I appreciate like balancing that with stories where characters can't navigate conflict through, violence. They're more passive in some ways. I mean,
Subtleties.
Dorothea Brooke and Will Ladislaw, right? They can't do that much about their problems at certain points. They can mostly worry.
Cry at night in their beds.
Vocation and money and the circumstances of life. These are not problems that are easily solved. It's within a realm that's more familiar, right, to our lives. I mean, we're not going around punching people. Hopefully.
Nice. So for B, my word was boredom, which I don't have like a lot to say. Thankfully, I have not been too bored. One thing that comes to mind is that like when I was younger, there was like a fairly strong perception that like old books must be boring books. That like long sentences mean that something can't be like funny or fun or interesting. One of the things that's been like interesting to sort of like push at and like explore is to see where and like when do I as a reader become bored and like what comes into play for that. So I'm having like a mixed reaction to The Mill on the Floss. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it. I don't love it as much as Middlemarch. Middlemarch I love. And there are segments where I feel this like boredom or I feel this like resistance to the text, right? And so it's interesting to sort of like turn that towards myself and ask like what's coming up here? Why am I disengaging from it? What's going on? What do I as a reader want from my fiction? What am I asking for? What do I want to see? And how does that show up? And so like, for instance, with The Mill on the Floss, one of the things that I'm sort of like struggling with in part is that there's so much focus on this sibling relationship between Maggie Tulliver and her brother Tom Tulliver. And Tom is annoying as heck. And I am an only child. And I just like, I don't have the tolerance, I don't have the patience, I don't have the endurance to deal with difficult siblings. I don't understand it. I'm like, what do you mean there's like this person that you like know and have known your whole life that you like just kind of are like near and like frustrated by? Doesn't make sense. Don't get it. I don't have much tolerance for it. Do I find it offensive, the idea of siblings? I don't know. It sort of like gives me something to push against. So I think it can be fun to also ask yourself like, why are you bored? What's going on? So we're almost at the end. This is a long one, sort of apologies. So E is, you got 6 options. There's endings, economy, enjoyment, evolution, eccentric, and essential. Marcus, what's your E?
So my letter E is eccentric. I mean, I identified this strongly in Austen, which of course I know is not Victorian literature, but certainly is a influence and an antecedent, right? So that's how I'll get away with it. But I mean, the theme seems so strong in Austen, right? Of dealing with the eccentric people in your life, your eccentric family. I mean, so many Austen
siblings.
Heroines have to, I guess, find some way of dealing with the weird quirks of all the people surrounding them.
Especially their parents.
I'm from a Brazilian family. This is something that seems, to me it seems very Brazilian, although I'm sure it's one of those things that's universal and just every ethnicity thinks it's, that it relates in particular to them.
You certainly get that in Middlemarch with like Dorothea and like Mr. Brooke and other people.
And Celia.
Yeah.
Or Chatham,
Yeah.
to an extent. This is Cadwallader.
Mm-hmm.
Something else I like is, I appreciate how a lot of Victorian authors do seem to have a flair and a gusto for, is there like a little minor character who isn't going to do much? I'm going to give them a lot of like little quirks and eccentricities, or at least one, I think this is present in Mary Elizabeth Braddon. There's a lot of like lot of maidservants and valets who, we get maybe just a little bit of what they're thinking or some, funny little characteristic of theirs. This one maidservant who's very stone-faced and like, her, you can't tell if she's good or evil. You can't glean anything from her visage, because this book is all about, telling whether people are good or evil based on how they look.
Oh no.
So, but with her, you can't. So, I'm enjoying all these delightfully quirky minor characters. One of my favorite Japanese manga artists, so Japanese comics, Akira Toriyama, in his guide to making manga, one of his tips is you're coming up with the characters to populate your story. You got it for everyone, and then come up with some wacky quirk, something, nice and memorable, some wacky secret weakness that they have. I'm happy to see that this principle is followed in Victorian fiction.
I feel like Dickens is going to be good for you.
Yeah, people talk a lot about the
We've read a little bit,
characters in Dickens.
So for me, my E word was essential, which brought to mind some of the books that we consider like essential reading. Whether that's a good idea to kind of go for like the essentials first, or whether it's like could be nicer in a way to like find the like surprising options or like the underrated things. In particular, a lot of like what are considered sort of like canonical essential reading, they're kind of intimidating books in a way, and that I think can throw young readers, either young actual in literal age or like experience with Victorian literature, off a little bit, like this idea of like I'm gonna take on this huge book and it's gonna be like intense and like long and hard and stuff like that, whereas I think it can be helpful to sort of like step back from that. Our last letter this victober, of course, is R. Victober. Ooh, I don't like that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to stay.
It wasn't great.
It doesn't have to stay in.
And the words we came up with were realism, romance, regionalism, review, resonant, and regret. Marcus, what's your R word?
So it's resonant. I think I found that, it's really powerful when you identify or feel called out by something in one of these books. I mean, in Middlemarch, for example, I remember identifying with how Lydgate is some aspects of Lydgate's pride. I mean, his refusal to accept help from friends, right? I mean, that's a big part of the book. Rosamond is, always mentioning to him that he should ask someone for help. He should ask his friends for help. He doesn't like to open up about what he's going through with, with his acquaintances, friends, right?
Even her.
Yeah. That's something I can see within myself sometimes, That's something I struggle with, right? That's something that Eliot wrote so intelligently about that can be a challenge for a lot of people, right? Feels very powerful to feel called out by something across hundreds of years ago. So, I mean, I guess not hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing that comes to mind in speaking about resonance is, it can feel really resonant reading these books and looking at them in the frame of our present anxieties about concentration of wealth and how wealth is distributed, right? Is there any fairness in that? Will there ever be? Or social justice, right? And it's, interesting to think about all that in today, right? And our feelings about it today. Reading these stories set in this bizarrely structured economically world, right? Like where how land is titled and, how many thousands of pounds a year you get for this and that, right? And how's it different from
entailed?
How's it different from today? Or is the way the world works today more or less absurd? Obviously, it's less absurd in a lot of ways, right? But it's got its absurdities. Yeah. And just looking at it through that lens is always interesting. It can be, you can find it meaningful, you can find it dispiriting, but you'll find it something.
So my word was regionalism. And again, I'm going to reference a little bit a interesting reading that I found. A chapter title, The Provincial or Regional Novel by Ian Duncan. I'll provide what book it's from later. It's sort of talking about provincial novels, you know, Middlemarch. Like, what's a regional novel? Like, what do those words mean? What are the connotations with it? One of the things that he talks about and references is the way in which provincial can have a slightly kind of like negative connotation to it. There's also a little bit kind of questions of like nostalgia and like relationship between the regional or the provincial, but also like the greater nation. And I think you can also extend that out further and sort of contrast the regional or provincial to the like empire. Do you know? The distant other that is like very present within like the Victorian imagination. I do think you can also see that in interesting ways in connection to industry and how the society became like connected to other parts of the world, including the same country. One of the things that like comes to mind is from The Mill and the Floss is the way in which it feels very central to this like specific area, but then there's sort of like what is useful to somebody of this world. So it relates to Tom Tulliver's education and like how is his education that he's been given actually useful for the world in which he is in, and like and that world that's changing. So like I recently got to a point in which Tom is like looking for a situation. He's looking for like a job so he can start providing support to his family, and a relative is kind of like, what use are you for like helping here? You haven't really learned anything that's useful or helpful. You could go do this instead, but you'd have to start kind of at the bottom, and then like these types of things, and the ways in which you establish yourself within this limited context, but that context is changing so much over time, and so how can you be useful here and now? So I think it's fun to think about like time and place, of course, and so far I've mostly read things that are the regional and more rural and like provincial, and rather than what's the word, metropolitan. So I think it's a fun theme. Yeah, so those are all our words.
Yeah.
I hope this was fun. It was certainly long. I hope that you feel inspired as well to participate if you want. I know that this is a slightly different approach. It is sort of like inspired a little bit by some of the specific challenges that are going on for Victober. As a reminder, we will put the list of words down below. We're not going to tag anybody specifically because we're little baby YouTubers and we don't want to be presumptuous, because maybe you don't want to do this. But we would love to hear your thoughts, and feel free to just comment down below if you want. You don't have to roll a die to select your words. You could just pick words that sound interesting to you. And yeah. All right. Happy Victober. Happy reading. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the rambles. We want to hear you ramble. Yeah.
Thank you for watching.
Boop, boop, boop. Why'd I do that? The charming bloopers.
Yes. Everyone's just watching
just
the video,
skipping
not
to the
even paying
blooper.
attention, just waiting for the bloopers.
Our last letter this Victober, of course, is R. Victober. Ooh, I don't like that. Yeah. So my R word, my R word, topic, my R topic. Nice. I wish we were ending on that. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll say something interesting. I can show you Benji.
Yeah.
Benji. Oh my god.
Baby.
This is Benji. Oh my god, his eyes look so spooky.
No, sweetie.